Hello and welcome to another episode of Literary Gladiators, the show where we discuss and debate literature in all of its forms. If it's written work, it's game. Let's meet the panel.
Hi, I'm Larry.
I'm Frank Argote-Freyre, professor at Kean University.
I'm Sarah Scheidt. Hi.
And I'm Josh. And today we are very thrilled and honored for the first time in Season 10 to introduce two new people to the panel. First, I want to introduce somebody, a new friend of mine that I met, and she was eager to take part, and we are eager to have her on. Sarah, welcome aboard.
Thank you. Hello.
And
Yay, Sarah.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Y'all are nice.
Sarah's a very nice person, and she works as a
family partner. It's like a social worker at a preschool.
Alrighty, excellent. And I am also honored to introduce an instructor that I had for History of Cuba back at Kean University. And his classes were very thrilling and entertaining. He would incorporate movies, stand-up comedy, clips, and he would teach the class from the present day and work his way back, because a lot of people, when learning about Cuba, are interested and intrigued with those particular details. Professor Freyre, or Frank, honored to have you on board.
Thank you, Josh. I'm just really proud of what you're doing. I'm happy to support a former student, and this type of work, such grassroots work in terms of bringing literature to people, is really something I'm thrilled to take part in. So thank you for inviting me today.
Thank you for coming. It's great to have you on board, especially because you incorporate literature into your history classes as well. I know you talk a lot about Jose Marte and several other writers I wouldn't have known if it's outside of History of Cuba. But the work that we're going over today is something that Frank suggested, and that is The Night Face Up by Julio Cortazar. And that was featured in a 1960s issue of The New Yorker. I know, funny enough, it seems like a lot of people are able to recognize a short work or a general work in literature if it was featured in The New Yorker. I had a subscription for a period of time myself, but not back in the 60s because I'm not that old. Frank, you have a discussion starter for?
I do. Well, so the reason I assigned this article, it's only 7 pages, and to your point, Josh, I like to incorporate literature about Latin America into my classes. I find most of my students don't know very much about Latin America, and so this does 2 things for me. One, it happens to be about the Aztecs, so I use it in my History of the Aztecs class, so it brings us right to that topic, and then it introduces an important literary movement in Latin America, which is called magical realism. And Cortazar, Julio Cortazar, an Argentine writer, is one of the principal figures in this movement. And so I'm very much interested to hear what the panel thinks about it and to exchange thoughts about it. So for me, historically speaking, this piece deals with one of the greatest stereotypes about the Aztecs. When people think about the Aztecs, they think about them in the same way that Julio Cortazar does in this short story. And so with the focus on human sacrifice, which is, embedded in this story. So, yeah, that's my goal in using it. One, to talk about the Aztecs, introduce the class to the Aztecs. It's the first reading they look at, and then to look at this movement of literature.
I think when I looked into the whole idea of the War of the Blossoms or the War of the Flowers, where there was a great deal of concentration on the Aztecs and their efforts for human sacrifice, I think it really gave me a clear understanding of approaching the text. But one book that I remember reading pertaining to and I don't, not necessarily the Aztecs, but Central America is the ruins, which it was adapted into a film, and how they seem to portray these people in almost, you don't get their point of view, and it is almost as if they are barbaric and they're looking to kill people.
That's exactly right. I mean, so that's the stereotype that Cortazar is playing with, right? They don't have a voice, generally speaking, in history until recently. Recently, historians, and certainly I make that effort, try to give them a voice. But this focus on the human sacrifice practices of the Aztecs goes right back to the conquistadors. That's what they noticed first, and of course it's obviously why they would have noticed that. But and then they use it as justification to conquer them and enslave them and essentially destroy them. And so for 400 some odd years, the historiography, that is the way the Aztecs are looked upon, focuses on their practice of human sacrifice. And so I want them to see the stereotype in this literature, and then we can deconstruct it. We can start looking at what's the context for this practice. So more on that whenever you...
Human sacrifice and the idea that...
it is a core of their religious belief, right?
It is.
So,
It is.
mean, to call it a stereotype, right? I mean, it's the biggest part of their culture. It's the most sacred thing they do. Or up there.
Well, to not understand it in the context of why it's happening, right? So, for example, if you were to think about Christianity and the fact that so many wars have been fought over Christianity, right? But when you think about Christianity, you're thinking about the faith and some of those practices. Well, here, it's just a story about human sacrifice in a lot of the literature. It doesn't look into the context of why they're doing it. They're doing it because they think the world won't continue to exist unless they do it. The sun won't rise unless they do it. So just to focus on the human sacrifice piece is missing kind of the point.
That's what we have the tendency to do in general, where we take one aspect of any given topic or subject and concentrate on that and apply it to a particular group of people. I know exactly what you're saying, as opposed, because there's so much to any given subject, and I would say the Jewish people could be viewed as victims, the Muslim community, but I know where you're getting at as far as I mean, while it is an aspect, while they did engage in human sacrifice, they did much more than just that. I know with the Mayans, they made a lot of contributions to the way that we the concept of time. But even though the world did not end in 2012.
Right. Obviously, their development of corn as a product and their unique civilization in terms of their construction of their pyramids, their emphasis on astronomy is all very profound, and that is overlooked in the historiography. I'm very curious. I heard you sort of saying they were wrong in terms of doing that. Yeah, I'm not. I'm not advocating human sacrifice.
Absolutely not.
But by the same token, the Christians of Europe went into Muslim areas and killed thousands of people, and in the name of religion, and they conducted all these pogroms against the Jews, right? So to think of the Aztecs as uniquely savage, based on human sacrifice, without looking at the context of other religious practices by the Europeans, who are the ones that are actually saying they're barbaric, misses the context of the issue.
I think you can apply that to all religions, though.
That the context of the issue is that they were wrong and therefore lost.
Yeah, I would say that...
Okay, I don't agree with either of you if that's where you're heading, but that's good. Yeah,
I mean, the fact that we don't engage in human sacrifice anymore, it's not relevant to today, especially in the unnamed character's circumstance.
Well, it is an anti-Christian practice.
Yes, I would say that much is true.
Yeah, it's certainly anti-Christian, but many of the folks in this era that we're looking at, which is medieval Europe, when the Spanish come over and conquer the Aztecs,
With the
many
help of
of
many
them-
other tribes. Right?
many, yes,
They were being brutalized by the Aztecs.
yes, they were. But many of the Europeans are conducting their own brutal tactics.
That is true.
I think
So-
there's plenty of religious groups that
But at the core
have been
of
able
but
to.
at the core of Christian belief is mercy, wisdom, grace.
I think that there's
And
radicals.
at the core
in-
of this belief system is human sacrifice to make the sun come up.
Right,
So, I
that
mean,
is, yeah,
It's
but
going to fail.
well, I know, but you see, what you're doing is you're giving the Europeans license to
Not
destroy
license.
them.
No, I didn't.
But that's what you're
Yeah,
saying,
they're-
right? Well, so their belief system is wrong.
It would have been better if they were converted. Instead of
Well, they did convert them. They destroyed those who wouldn't convert, and then they converted others.
Hmm.
And in the process, they completely destroyed their
brutally
literature.
savage culture.
Yeah, as I say, that's how the Europeans view it.
Well, that's
But others,
relatively true, right? Europe was pretty well unified. I mean, there was always war in Europe, true enough, and there was war here when we got here. But I guess what I'm struggling with is the fact that, I don't know, I see it as just biblical fulfillment. It's like what's going to happen.
it's like Cortez were sitting here with us
Right.
and arguing that point. That's exactly what Hernan Cortez would say, that we are inspired by our God, by Jesus, to convert these people, and we're going to do it whether they like it or not, and if we have to kill them all, we'll do that too. So, but what I'm saying to you is there's another piece to that. That's not particularly Christian.
No, that's not.
There's radicals in all areas, though, too. The radical Islamics, we've had major conflicts with them, and major conflicts have taken place overseas. And I think that there's plenty of instances. I think one of the major instances of those brutal conflicts are in the name of religion and belief in their higher being. I think that's the fact of the matter, and it's very hard to argue against that too.
No, yeah, I wouldn't argue against that.
As far as this work is concerned, one thing that really stuck out to me was as Frank said, the use of magical realism, and which part is true and which part is a dream.
Should we tell our audience a little bit of background on the story? And
Yes, absolutely.
yeah, so the way the short story starts, it's only 7 pages, so I highly recommend it to our audience. The Night Face
I'll
Up,
leave a link down below
great.
in the description box.
And basically, it starts off, a guy is on a motorcycle in some unnamed city. You never hear what the motorcycle rider's name is, but he gets on his motorcycle and he starts going through the streets. It's a cool evening, unlike today in New Jersey. And so he's driving down the road. He sees a woman crossing. He is worried he's going to hit her. And then he averts his motorcycle and crashes somehow. The next time you see him, he's being taken into an ambulance. He's feverish and is starting to lose, context and consciousness. And then as the story moves along, it moves between him running from the Mexica Aztecs, who he's concerned are, going to capture him and destroy his village, to your point earlier, and the scene in the hospital where he's being treated, and it goes back and forth. And as the short story unfolds, it shifts focus. It becomes less scenes about the hospital, and it almost starts to merge into this alternate reality where he's about to be a human sacrificial victim.
Yeah.
I lean
very
very
interesting.
much toward the idea that this that the motorcycle and the hospital are a dream, but in a very weird kind of way, because this is the future, and where he is in what would be if his interactions with the Aztecs in the swampland or the marshlands is reality. That's 400 years back, because with the motorcycles, it has to be present day. There were no motorcycles back in the 16th century. But there's the whole idea of whether or not he's even still alive. But you wanted to say anything, Sarah? You haven't said as much.
Oh, yeah, I've been listening. I was just thinking, I actually didn't, I read it once, full disclosure, but in the concept that he, kind of going off of the idea of Aztecs with both, like, possibly the savageness of human sacrifice, but also the beauty of their culture that could think of things like cultivating corn and what they viewed of the stars, so kind of that idea of, like, this savageness, but also, like, the beauty in the culture, which I feel like could be like any person, like, and like people groups like the Europeans, my neighbor, me, my cat, he can like take out a praying mantis pretty quick, but like each person has that mix, and it's interesting that he's kind of feeling the Aztecs coming for him. I wonder what he assigns to Aztec, like how we're each assigning something to the Aztecs, and that he was hit while avoiding a woman from dying. I wonder like what, if there's any like kind of like how he's perceiving the world and what's good and what happens to those who will like miss someone but at the chance of them getting hurt, and then as he does that, kind of he's the one like having the pain of that like sacrifice, like self-sacrifice, not like human, but wanting to save someone, and it's interesting.
It is pretty interesting, and the texts, the instances run very parallel, where being tied down in a hospital bed is that could be equated to him being tied down by the Aztecs, because at some point they do engage in that methodology, and you have him where he's feeling feverish and having spasms in the bed. At one point he's in the dark of the marshlands, where that's all taking place, and he's really feeling lost and jittery there too. And there's a great I think they do a great job with the olfactory sense, where scent plays a huge role, more so than I've seen in plenty of other works of literature. It had a marshy smell, as per page 69 in this particular text, but you have that dark, fresh composite fragrance, which to me is kind of like something you would find turning into compost, with a greater emphasis on the odor of excrement.
You can really smell that marshland in the story, right?
Yeah, and that really has a great impact on the unnamed man's atmosphere too, because it really it drags him down and makes his quest all the more challenging, trying to get away from the Aztecs.
And then in the hospital room, I can really taste that seltzer water. He's got a bottle of seltzer water there, and he's, at first he drinks it, and and then you see it at the side of the bed near the end of the story where he can't grab it.
Yeah.
And you feel like, for me, well, my students ask several questions, right? Which is the reality? Is the reality the motorcyclist, or is the reality the guy running from the Mexica, from the Aztecs? Which is the reality? And it sounds like you think it's more the motorcyclist, right?
I think at first look, I think it's the motorcyclist and the hospital. But thinking about it more, I think that there's a good argument toward it being him being with the Aztecs, or him going, trying to get away from the Aztecs and avoiding the human sacrifice. It could, and then there's that whole idea that it is neither, where he's the only part that really is. He could already be captured, and the only part that would be true would be that ending where he's being taken to the priest.
Right, and the ending, you know, where he's actually, he's actually sacrificed. I think the last scene is they plunge the knife into him, right?
Yeah.
I think that last sentence, I was like, oh,
Yeah.
okay.
But when we,
Oh,
but the question is,
What a bad knife!
when they plunge the knife into him, what happens next? He could he could be waking up in the hospital bed and somebody's sticking a needle in
Oh,
him,
that's true.
or it could just it could be the truth. I think that Cortazar is playing with us there, and he wants to leave it up to interpretation, that there is no answer. Because I've done that with my works. I've written work, and I like to engage in that little methodology myself.
Cat and mouse game with your readers?
Yeah, a bit of a cat and mouse game, or just leaving it up to their interpretation. And leaving it open-ended.
I don't think that makes for very good storytelling. Honestly, like, I mean...
You like a definitive answer?
It's not even necessarily definitive, but a definitive intent, I think, is important. I think you should be trying to say something.
The only one that really...
like, well, whatever you think it is.
The one person that does do that is J.K. Rowling, where she'll leave something open-ended, and then later on, if somebody asks on Twitter if they wanted an answer, she'll give them an answer.
Oh, that's nice.
She's known for doing that. But
So this is really reminiscent of that entire school of magical realism. Probably the most famous writer of the group is Gabriel Garcia Marquez, 100 Years of Solitude. And Marquez, I heard him say in an interview one time that, because, you know, often in magical realism, reality starts to merge with some magical occurrences that are occurring. One of the writers that still engages in this is very popular is Isabel Allende. He's one of the modern...
Yeah, she's really picking up a lot of acclaim. I think her books have been recognized, either long-listed or short-listed for Man Booker International.
So Marquez says the dysfunction of the political system in Latin America is so unbelievable that it's almost like magical. So sometimes, you know, there's that saying that reality is stranger than fiction, and magical realism seeks to tap into that sense. Yeah, you think this is crazy, but you know, this could happen, or this is how it feels in Latin America. It's also influenced by surrealism. You know, it's interesting. I was looking over my notes on Cortazar for our chat today, and it looks like Cortazar was influenced by not only surrealism, the painting form, but jazz, the improvisational nature of jazz, where, you know, it can go from one thing to the next. And so, for me, that was interesting how literature is being influenced by other arts, you know, whether it's painting or music. And so that's another sort of aspect of the work that I try to share with my students.
One thing I really thought about with if there was a work of modern cinema that made me think of this, it was the film Inception. With Leonardo.
Is that Leonardo? Oh, yes.
Because by the end of the film, you have no idea which is what is real, what is a dream, what dreams within a dream. This is a bit more consistent, but it's, instead of that spinning top, it's that knife that comes about at the end. But it's very experimental as a work. I don't know. I'd have to look more into the surrealism part of it to make a call on that. But I'd say that it's a legitimate. I would say that's a good idea. So.
I thought you picked up on something interesting earlier when you were talking about like how the parts in what I'm going to call like a vision or dream state, which would be the Aztec and parts of the story, are kind of paralleling like his state of mind as he's going through this. Like when he got to the hospital first, right? That's when he's like in the dark and in hiding and like confused and in the state of confusion. And then as the outcome becomes more certain, right? Then I don't know. It's some kind of progression, possibly between the two parallels as they're running. I'd have to read it again to see if that stands up. But I was just wondering if.
I think there are great similarities that could be connected to the two of them, and I think I could definitely see it being played out in a film atmosphere where somebody could adapt this for the screen, where they transition the hospital scene to the Aztec scene, where something very similar is happening in both spots. But I get what you're saying as far as that's concerned.
Yeah, it's like the emotion of it is what links it.
Mm-hmm.
Is what I think it might have been, but I'm not sure. I'd have to read it again because I didn't pick up on it when I was reading it the first time.
Mm-hmm. It does take more than one. I feel that it took more than one time to read it, but that's just my opinion.
And the beauty of this dialogue that we're having here is this is all from one 7-page short story.
Yeah.
So sometimes you can read a 200-page book and not engage in such speculation and.
Yeah, I think that's why we go over anything. When I say if it's written work, it's game, I mean if it's written work, it is game. Where we talk about everything, and we can get so much we can get something out of a poem of 4 lines and a stanza, and we can also get a lot out of a 500-page work. We may not, a 500-plus page work, maybe not the most flattering of opinions, but that's beside the point. But do we have any final thoughts about the night face up?
Ooh, I have a final thought. I was just thinking as we're all talking, admittedly when I read this, I was reading as everyone was talking in our room, so I was trying to focus, but it took me till like halfway towards the end to realize that there was a comparison with the Aztec, and I was like, oh, he's probably just like, I don't know what he's talking about, and then the last sentence, and then I was like, oh, so as we came on, like I was like having all these different thoughts and ideas from what you all were saying, and then, so it made it very exciting to listen to you all, but I was thinking a lot about the comparison of just the two different people, and I've been liking a lot of story plots that have to do with like families at different timelines, or just I kind of like the sci-fi movies that people are there's like alternate versions of themselves or different time periods, but to think about possibly like the same person, or if it was two different people, the idea of like a soul, and this man, the one man is hit, has a motorcycle accident, and he's doing something sacrificial, and he's powerless on a bed to, not human sacrifice, but still it's like a very intrusive like medical procedure to save his life, and the other man would be running away from the Aztecs, and you could have varying views of the Aztecs, but they're both so powerless to dying, and even though they have completely different lives and different reasons for like running from death and wanting to be alive, like they're just both powerless, and it's interesting to think of them as him as one man or as two people, and just the similarities of being human and having a soul versus all the reasons you could be put in these positions. Well, thank you guys for telling me that was what the story was. I did not even know it's about the Aztecs. But it's just wild, It's just wild.
Yeah,
it certainly is.
It's definitely about being moral, vulnerable, and dying, I think, right? Like,
And
to me, the sense I get when I was finished reading it was that he's died, he's dead there. Like that's the sense I get. I can't say for sure.
He pretty much.
I
mean,
he's done.
I just feel that's up to us to interpret. I think that if he's in that world, I think that he's definitely gone. Even in the hospital, I mean, he was exhausting himself with feverish-like symptoms, but but there's so many views that could be.
Yeah, I mean, he could be drifting in and out of different dimensions.
Yeah, he could be drifting in and out of
chased down by devils and demons. I mean, it could be that.
But it definitely couldn't. The only thing that it definitely cannot be is that the two are. He was not involved in both. I think that he's only physically involved in one or the other because of the timeline. I don't think it's that fantastical where he lasts for 400 years.
Well, no, not literally. But it could be that interdimensional thing. It could be demons chasing him, tying him up and sending him to.
That would
G double
that
hockey
would
stick.
that would be genre jumping, but yeah.
I mean, you know, it's only after the fact that you call it a genre, right? When he's writing it, he's not saying, I'm going to be a magical realist. It's done after the fact. Am I right on that?
Well, I mean, he's definitely... so his work, this short story, comes out in 1967, as Josh mentioned. That's the same year that 100 Years of Solitude was published. So by this time, by the late 50s and mid-60s, there is a conscious movement underway in Latin America. It's sometimes referred to as the boom. And so they're influencing each other. You know, sometimes if you see Picasso and Matisse and other painters, you can see that they are influencing each other in their painting. So you can see, if you read enough of this magical realism, you'll see that Borges is influencing Marquez, Marquez is influencing Carpentier, Carpentier is influencing Cortazar. So by this point, there is a movement underway. You know, there's a clear sense that this is a genre now that needs to be explored, and the Latin Americans, you know, claim particularly. Although there's some dispute about that, but anyway, that's for another segment.
They had a great group of writers too. I mean, I'm more familiar with their poetry, like Neruda and Para, but not necessarily. I'll definitely have to get more into their prose with the people like Marquez and Borges. We did go over Borges and but we have. It's definitely something that's worth exploring. And last thing I wanted to bring up was I think that as you were talking about the taste of the seltzer, that's the same thing I was seeing the same thing with the golden broth. That they
Yes, when they brought him the soup.
Yeah, the soup, the celery and the leeks.
You can taste that soup, right?
Yeah, and the parsley. It's a very refreshing taste, but on the other hand, the green is very reflective of where he is with the marsh.
Yes.
There's that, but it's that gustatory image that they do a great. You feel that you're in the moment.
My final thought on the whole thing is, I love the way that Cortazar gradually transitions the whole thing. So if you start reading it, you know, you're clearly the motorcyclist. If you're envisioning yourself, this person, you're the motorcyclist. And it isn't somewhere until the middle of page 2, maybe beginning of page 3, that for me, the first time I read it, I said, something strange is about to occur here. They bring him into the hospital, and he hears birds. That's not something I associate with a hospital.
Yeah.
Right? But he just throws it in there, one phrase, and then we're back to the hospital. And then, as we get into it further, more on the jungle scene, and the running, and the dagger that he has by his belt, and then eventually he has a conflict. He apparently kills an Aztec warrior trying to lunge at him. And then the hospital slips away, you know, and then this is our reality. So I like that transition. It's like when I'm driving here today, you know, if I'm driving from a city, you know, first what I'm seeing are these large edifices, these buildings, these skyscrapers. Then I get into the next area, and it's suburban. I'm transitioning to something else, and then finally I'm in a rural area. And so that's what he does. It's like, for me, almost a seamless transition from the motorcyclist to the sacrificial victim at the temple altar.
Such a moment of ease, and then being so restricted and helpless.
Yeah, it was handled really well. It was.
Yeah, I would say
very
that
smooth.
much. I really was once you get into it, it's a really, it's really good brain food.
And my students always complain, oh, professor, another 150, 200 pages this week. And now this is a nice, quick hit. You know, 7 pages, and it's joy. You know, it's not that the short story is joyful, but you'll get the feeling of it in 7 pages, approximately 10 minutes, 15 minutes.
Yeah, I would say that much is true. If you're interested in checking out The Night Face Up, here's the copy that I have. I printed it off from online. I'll definitely have to look and see if it was ever published in a physical book. It was published in the New Yorker back in 1967.
April 22nd.
Alrighty. Yep, if you are into the New Yorker archives, which is always a good thing to get into, especially if you are a fanatic. But I'm also going to leave a link down below to the Night Face sub so that you can read it and engage in the discussion. And be sure to join us next time for another episode of Literary Gladiators. For now, keep reading.